Okay, well, welcome everybody back to our session here. This session, we're going to go through the installation of ZVM. Now that you know something about the product, we're going to walk through the process of actually installing it. Today, we're going to go through an overview of the install process. We'll look at the choices you have to make when you're doing an installation or planning an installation, how the worksheets can help you with that. Then we're going to go through just some demos of installs. Hopefully they'll work. I'm going to start up a single system non-SSI install in an LPAR. And then since that takes quite a while to finish due to our kind of slow HMC SE connections, I'm going to start up an SSI installation second level just to see the differences there. So hopefully this will give you a good sense of the installation. So I'd like to turn attention now to the installation choices topic. You order ZVM through Shopz, so somebody in your installation has the authority to do that. And when you order a ZVM 7.3, we talked about this in the overview, it's typically an SDO order number. When that order is fulfilled, you're going to have to download the materials to your workstation, for example, and then make those materials available to the installation process. And when you look at what Shopz gives you, you'll see this additional material heading. And this is where there are ISO files for the material to install ZVM. And if you look at the VM product material, and I'll look at those in the next two slides, there are zip files that contain the materials to install ZVM. So if you look at the additional materials, you can see that there are ISO files, two ISO files for ZVM, and one is ECKD, so installation on 3390. Another set of two ISO files would allow you to install on E devices. So this is FBA format, and those would be FCP attached SCSI disks that the control program is using as emulated disks or emulated devices. The same is true for the VM materials, but here you have zip files. So those ISO files would allow you to burn DVDs that you could use in the HMC DVD drive if your HMC has one still. Or you could take those ISO files and give them to a Linux server that's available on the network that your HMC and SE can get to. You could loop back mount those ISO files and serve the content via FTP. The zip files are an alternative, so you can take the zip files and you can unzip the content on a USB device, for example, to use with your HMC, or you can unzip those files again on a system like a Linux system where FTP could serve the content of the directory where you unzip the content of the two zip files there for either 3390 or SCSI disk. So with that in mind, then, let's look at the installation choices that need to be made. So we've sort of talked about the media here. There are media choices. So how are you going to make the installation material available to an LPAR where you're going to do the installation? So you basically have the choice of DVD in the HMC or a USB drive in the HMC, an FTP server that the HMC can contact, or if you're installing ZVM second level, in other words, you already have a VM system and you can use that VM system to do the install. This is my favorite because it's the easiest. If you take the content of those two zip files and you upload that content to a CMS formatted mini disk, you can make the DVD or zip file content available to a virtual machine where you're installing ZVM, and everything's on a CMS mini disk, so there's no network I/O that has to be done at all. It's a very fast install. So in addition to media, there's an installation type choice that you have to make. There's the traditional install where you're actually installing systems. So under the traditional installation, you can install a single ZVM system, non-SSI, and you can install on ECKD DASD or eDevices, SCSI, FBA SCSI, or you can do an SSI traditional install, and you can install from 1 to 4 members. This install is limited to ECKD, and that's simply because that's a requirement for SSI at this point in time, primarily because of the common volume. You will need to make sure, if you're doing an SSI install, that you have FICON CTCs defined to interconnect all of the members. If you're doing a second level SSI install, those FICON CTCs can be virtual CTCs, so that makes the second level install even easier. Another installation type, which we won't cover, is upgrade, and so that's an install where you have an existing VM system or an existing cluster, and you're going to use the upgrade process to take that system or a single member in the cluster and upgrade it from, say, 7.2 to 7.3. That is considered an installation as well. Another choice you need to make is the installation level. So a first level install is in a native LPAR. A second level installs in a virtual machine, and this is where you can use the install materials on a CMS mini disk. What we're going to see when we look at the installation menus is there is an option to install second level but run first level when you're installing an SSI cluster, and that's a really handy choice, particularly if you have a VM LPAR where you can gain access to the DASD that's going to be used in the LPARs that represent the members of the cluster. You can do the install second level, having everything set up for execution first level, and that again makes the install process quite easy. All right, so with those choices, there are the installation worksheets, and they help you organize the decisions and the data that you need to be able to perform the installation. The InstPlan tool, it's going to gather that information via 3270 menus, so having it already written down on the worksheets is really helpful to be able to just move through that process quickly. So these worksheets are in the installation guide. I'm just showing them to you here, and I've sort of filled in some things for my attempt at a first level install. And you can see here that I'm going to allow all of the components of VM to default to installing in the shared file system. That's really the recommendation these days, as opposed to mini disks. My language is going to be American English, so I'm going to install on 3390 ECKD DASD, and my volume size is a mod 9, so 10,016 cylinders. I'm going to use the traditional name for the common service file pool, VMPSFS, and I'm going to have a default password of my secret. You can see with 7.3, when you install the system, it's possible to change the default password from WD5JU8QP, which it's been for a very long time. And then the installation type choice I'm going to make here is non-SSI, and my system I'm going to call Demo VM. So here's the installation worksheet for DASD, and this is non-SSI 3390. So I need to have separate DASD volumes for the res volume, potentially the release volume, first and second release volume, the common volume, spool, and page. So it's helpful to already identify the real device addresses in the LPAR where you're going to do the install so that you know that information beforehand. And then since I'm going to install from an FTP server, when I use the HMC and the load from a removable media function, I'm going to need to know the IP address of my FTP server, and I'm going to need to know the user ID and password for that server and a path to get to the content of those two zip files for ECKD DASD. So I've got that information all set up here so that I can just key it in on the HMC dialog when I'm going to do the load function. Now, if I was installing SSI, here you can see the choice that comes up in the panel. So after the installation is complete, where will the SSI cluster actually run? In other words, where will it be IPL'd? Is it going to be IPL'd first level or second level? And the reason you make that choice here for SSI is if it's a first level execution of the cluster, then you're going to get a panel where you need to supply the CTC device addresses that are going to be interconnecting all the members. If it's going to run second level, then you never have to provide that information because the install process will just set you up with virtual CTC addresses and a nifty file that goes on the A disk of the installation virtual machine that has profile execs that you can cut and paste into real profile execs on each of the virtual machines that will represent the members. And those profile execs define virtual CTCs and couple those virtual CTCs so that the CTC network that's all virtual is automatically set up for you. Now, when you're installing in an SSI, you need to supply the system name, so the member name, I'm going to have VM01, 2, 3, and 4, and then the LPAR or virtual machine name where each of those members will run. You then also have potentially a lot more DASD addresses because you have some common DASD that exists and is shared read-write between all members of the cluster. And then you have member-specific DASD addresses that you have to identify. This is what the CTC menu and also the CTC worksheet looks like. So here I'm defining CTC addresses that are going to interconnect every member in the cluster. And the install process allows me to define two CTCs interconnecting each member. You would have to then manually expand that after the install process to get yourself to 16 between each. All right. So with that said, let's actually see if we can start up a process here. So I've got an LPAR and I've got the integrated 3270. I already started that on this LPAR. This is where I'm going to try to install a single system. And so I'm going to go to the recovery and do a load from media. And we saw this in the worksheets, so I have to identify information here. I'm going to type in my 68, 18, 253 is my FTP server. It's an anonymous FTP server. I don't really need a PW, but I can just put anything in there. And then my path was /pub/730 / this is uppercase / all right, that looks correct. So we're not gonna save that, no. And so what you see here is the firmware went out to the FTP server and it found an ins file there that tells the firmware exactly what files to load, where into memory in the LPAR to start the installation system. So what's actually being loaded right now is some rather big files that are going to end up being a VM system that runs entirely in memory in the LPAR. And once that load is done, you'll see that VM system will start to emit its messages to the integrated 3270 here. So we'll clear our screen. All right, so we now have an installation system running here. And so I can use DVD Prime, that's one of the install tools, to tell the install process that I'm going to install on 3390s from a server. So I run that, and it's going to load a file with install tools that's necessary to be able to run instaplan. And now I can just run instaplan traditional, and we'll get to our menu. So this looks a lot like the worksheets that we just looked at. So I'm going to keep everything in the shared file system. I'm going to use American English. I'm going to have mod 9 DASD. I'm going to do VMP SS as my shared file pool. I'm going to do a non-SSI install with demo VM. And here's the new 7.3 facility to change the password to my secret. All right, so there's the first panel, and I can press F5 to process that data. Reflects back to me everything that I've entered so far. So if that looks good, I can enter a yes. And now I need to enter the DASD addresses that I'm going to use. So let's see, I'm going to use Charlie 34, and I'm not going to format them in this case. You would typically always want to format them, but I know that these DASD volumes have already been formatted. So Charlie 35 is for the release volume, Charlie 30, Charlie 31, Charlie 32. So here's the DASD I'm going to use for the installation process, and it matches my installation worksheets. So I'm ready to hit F5 to process. And so before I can do the install, I need to attach those DASD devices to the installation virtual machine, which happens to be maint. And we've got them there, so now I can start the install process. And from here on out, everything's just going to happen automatically. Since I did not have to format the DASD, the install process kicks off very, very quickly. And it's going to spend now over an hour at least loading mini disks on the release volume and the res pack and so forth. So it takes a fairly long period of time to install in an LPAR like this. And again, that's really just due to the communication that's taking place with the FTP server. So rather than sit with this just for a long period of time, what I'd like to switch over to is a virtual machine here. And this virtual machine then has access to DASD. And actually, let me go back here to the charts real quick. So to do a second level install, again, the benefit of second level is I don't need to have an FTP server or HMC, DVD, or USB. I can put all the install material on a CMS mini disk. For 7.3, it requires about 8,600 cylinders for that mini disk, and there's instructions in the installation guide, Appendix K, that go over the concept of FTPing it from your workstation, for example. The install virtual machine, where you're going to do the install, best to have about 2 gig of memory just because the VM systems being installed will be IPL'd there. You need a read-write 191 mini disk, and then you need 3 special mini disks. So a read-write 2222 mini disk that's 10 cylinders, a 242 Charlie that's 10 cylinders, and a 2 Charlie Fox Zero that's 120 cylinders. I need also access to that mini disk that has the DVD content, and then read-write access to all the DASD devices that are going to be populated during the install process. And so that would include, if it's an SSI, then it's all the DASD for every member in the SSI cluster. So I have a virtual machine here that has that capability. So it has those mini disks. It has access to all the DASD that's required to do the install. So instead of having an installation system in memory, like we just worked with in the LPAR, I already have a VM system available to me. So I don't need to have that install VM system. I basically bootstrap up the install process using mini disks and pipe commands from this first level system. So the first thing I'm going to do is access mains 193 because that's where a tool called instapipe resides. And I'm going to go ahead and access the mini disk where I have the DVD content. We can take a quick look at that. Here's the DVD content that I uploaded from a workstation. So that's the 2 zip files. And then I'm going to use this command here, instapipe, to load some pipe stages that would allow me to populate via the DVD content the 222 mini disks to actually get started here. So I'm going to run this pipe command that is going to run a stage called DVD decode, and that stage was loaded into memory by instapipe, and that stage is going to read, you can see it's reading off of mode W there. It's going to read this image file off of that mini disk. It's going to unpack the contents because they're in packed format. And then it's going to use another stage, ECKD restore or rest, that again was loaded by instapipe. And it's going to write the content of that mini disk out to my 222 mini disk. So we'll let that go. And so that has run. Now I'm going to re-IPL CMS because I want to get rid of those pipe stages from memory because I really want to use now the content that has been loaded to 2222, that mini disk. So I'm going to access that mini disk as mode C where I had the 193 before. I'm going to again access the DVD content at mode W, and then I'm going to run that same DVD prime command that we ran in the LPAR. And in this case, I'm telling the install tools I'm going to install on 3390, but instead of a server, I have a local disk that has the material on it. So we'll run DVD prime, and you'll notice it did exactly the same thing here that it did in the LPAR. It populated the 24 Charlie Charlie disk, and it populated the 2 Charlie Fox Zero mini disk. So The moral of the story is even in the LPAR where we were automatically logged on to maint when that install system IPL'd in memory, it had the same mini disk that we just set up on this virtual machine here. So we're ready again to then go into the menus. So we'll do an inst plan traditional again. And so we're going to go through here making similar choices. So I'm going to use American English. I'm going to install on Mod 9 DASD. I'm going to use VMP SFS as the file pool name. This time I'm going to install an SSI cluster. So how many members? I'm going to do 2, and my cluster is going to be called VMBCLUST. I'm just going to leave the default password in this case. So I process that, and now here I get a new menu. You didn't see this menu show up in the LPAR, and that's because I was doing a single VM system install, so this information is irrelevant. Here's where I can say I want to install second level, but actually run the cluster first level. And if I select this, then I'll get that panel we saw on the worksheet where I have to identify the CTCs that are going to interconnect the members. If I say I'm going to run this cluster second level, then I won't even see that because the install process is simply going to put activate IS link statements in the system config file that gets created for the cluster using virtual addresses that it knows will be correct for the virtual CTCs, because presumably you're going to use the little profile exec snippets that it creates for you. So again, I have to give my systems names. So I'll say VM01 is my first, and it's going to run in a virtual machine named VM Team 010. Now, if I was going to be running first level, what I would put here is the VM system name again, but instead of this VM Team 010, I'd put an LPAR name there, and that's the LPAR I have to run this member in. And the same then is true for VM02 is my other. I'm going to run that in a different virtual machine. So I have 2 different virtual machines. These are 2 members of an SSI cluster that are sharing DASD. So I'll process that. Now I see the same reflection coming back. Do you want to continue? Yes, I do. And so now I need to identify the DASD. Now, one thing I didn't mention when we were looking at these same menus in the LPAR install is you'll notice the labels are red. That means I can change the labels to anything I want. These are the defaults, but these panels allow you to change those labels to correspond to what you might have as an installation standard that you need to follow. All right, so I need to have enough DASD here to install the 2 systems. And so I'm keying in the device addresses that have to be available to this virtual machine. So when I did my single system, I just had this DASD right here. So I need a common volume, even though it's a single VM system, because that single VM system is in what's known as SSI ready format. I have a release volume. That's where maint 730's mini disks reside. And then I have a res volume, a spool, and a page volume. So in the SSI cluster, these are shared, so they only exist once. And then each member in the cluster has these 3 DASD devices that are private. So we'll process this information, and now we're back at the same place we were in the LPAR. All I need to do is run install, and away it goes. Now, you'll notice that this one gets going a whole lot faster, and that's because it doesn't have to worry about network communication. Let's see if we can get some status on what's going on in this other one. So here you can see the contrast of the two. The LPAR install, having to use the HMC, is loading the same mini disks, but you'll notice that the second level install is going a whole lot faster than the first level one is. So the first level install is not going to finish in time for this lecture to be done. It's going to poke along. The second level install, which is actually going to install 2 VM systems worth of stuff, it has a chance of finishing, although I don't think we're going to have to go the entire half an hour that we have left. We allocated an hour and a half for this, but the second level install is going to get done potentially in about 30 minutes. That's what it usually takes running second level. All right, so again, the installation that's a single system in an LPAR, when it's done, that VM system is ready to use. The interesting thing that's going on here is, even though we're in an LPAR here, the installation process in this LPAR is actually going to result in a second level VM system running for a period of time. And you'll know that that's happening because what you'll see is this system ID down here, IBM VM RAM. At a certain point in time, once all the DASD is populated, the install process is going to IPL the res pack that was populated, and that's going to be essentially running second level under the main user ID in this LPAR. And you'll notice that the system ID will change to be demo VM. Over here in the SSI install, the same thing is going to happen once all of the mini disks are populated on the first member's DASD. That's all that we need the install materials to actually write to. Then the first member in this cluster is going to be IPL'd, and the same process of setting up that VM system is going to occur as it's going to happen over here in the LPAR. Once that first member is entirely set up and ready to run, then the install process is actually going to copy the res pack, spool, and page volumes, well, the res pack basically volume over to the res volume for the second member, shut down the first member, IPL the second member here in this same virtual machine, and do the setup for that member as well. So both members of the cluster are going to be set up in this virtual machine here. However, once all the installs done, I can only run the one member in this virtual machine. I need another virtual machine to run VMO2 in. So the same process is really taking place in both of these installs. It's just faster over here and easier to do an SSI install. All right, rather than just look at that, let me go back and just look at a couple of more charts here, and then we'll come back. Because that first level install is never going to get done before we actually finish our session here, I want to show you some screenshots, and they're probably not real easy to see because the font is kind of small, but when the install process ends in the LPAR, you'll notice that a shutdown re-IPL was done, and that is because the installation RSU was installed, and so once that's installed, you need to re-IPL the system. It came back up and then disconnected basically from that integrated 3270. And again, if you can see down here, it's kind of hard to see, but you'll notice that the system ID that you see there is demo VM. So that's what's running now in this virtual machine in this LPAR. Because remember, we are logged on to a virtual machine named maint. So the next thing you'd want to do then is just press the enter key and you'll get a login screen to log in on the new system that's running as a guest of maint. And so we'd type in maint 730 as the virtual machine. I could type operator if I wanted to, but I'll log on to maint 730 and I'll use the my secret password. And what I'll see then is I'm logged on to maint 730 in demo VM. So now I want to shut down this VM system clean. So I would issue the command shutdown system demo VM, and the system will actually shut down. Now notice that in this case, with all the shutdown messages that came out, now my system ID is IBM VM RAM. So I'm back at the first level maint user ID in the LPAR. And so now what I need to do is to shut down system IBM VM RAM, and that actually shuts down this install system in the LPAR itself. Once I've done that, I'd go back to the HMC, I'd select the LPAR, and this time I would do a load instead of a load from media. I'd specify the DASD address of the res volume, which in my case was Charlie 30, and I would IPL that VM system in this LPAR. So now my demo VM would be running first level in the LPAR. Since I don't have anything else customized on this VM system yet, my only means of access to this VM system are through this integrated 3270. And that is a very clumsy interface. As you can see, it's just not very nice to use. So the very next thing that I'm going to want to do after installing VM is I'm going to want to customize the VM TCP IP stack so that it will support TN3270 logins to this VM system running in this LPAR. Then I can use my favorite TN3270 client. I can log in multiple times and I can do the configuration steps that are necessary to really make the VM system ready for a workload and ready for use. And so that's why the next session is going to be Bruce going over the ZVM TCP IP configuration and really ZVM networking in general, and then also the IP Wizard utility, which allows you to create a connection very, very easily with your VM system in the LPAR. So in terms of trying to summarize where we are in the installation, you can see we had to prepare our hardware resources and complete our worksheet. So for the first level install, I needed to set up an LPAR. That meant I had to do some IOCP work to provide IO devices to a particular LPAR. Then I had to go to the HMC and create an activation profile for this partition. And we saw the process then of using that once that partition was activated to use the HMC to do the installation. If we were installing an SSI, we could do up to 4 members either in an LPAR or, as we saw, in a second level virtual machine. And we've seen that if we're installing in a second level virtual machine, it's really the same process as installing first level. The way you get started is slightly different, but what you saw is in both cases, we went to DVD prime and then everything was exactly the same from that point onward. So doing a second level install versus a first level install isn't all that different. It's just a lot easier second level because you don't have to use the HMC. So in our second level install, we're working on a system. We're still on VM01. Got a holding, so that Looks like we're installing the installation RSU on our VMO1 system. Once that's done, the install process will go ahead and re-IPL VMO1, and then it will actually start copying the DASD to set up VMO2, the second member of our cluster. Let's see, how's our first level install is poking along here still. This 5 Baker Charlie Minidisc takes forever because it's almost a full Mod 3, I think, in size. So it's a pretty significant Minidisc to actually get going. So you can see the messages on the second level system. It just re-IPL'd, and after doing the RSU, it's finishing up the re-IPL process, and now it's DDRing. You can see M01 res to M02 res. So it's beginning the process of populating the DASD for the second member of the cluster. And it will obviously have to change some things when it does that, but that's quicker than trying to load from even the CMS-based DVD content, load an entire additional system when that really isn't necessary even in an SSI environment. Essentially, what's happening in the upgrade path is now you're going to actually do a second level install in the upgrade path. It will always be a second level install because you need to populate DASD with the new install materials that can then be used to push out the new content into your existing VM system. So the upgrade process has to get all those install materials that are in, those individual mini disks. If you put it in a CMS, which for an upgrade, I would say you always want to have a CMS mini disk with the DVD content because you're always going to install the work system second level under the MyGmaint virtual machine. So you'll do that install, and you're not even going to answer all these questions. It's just going to basically install the content on these DASD devices. And once it's done that, it will have populated a new release volume. So let's say you have 7.2 as your starting VM system. So you have a 7.2 VM system. Let's see, here we are on our second member here. Let's let it go here. So that's your starting point. You already have a 720 RL1 DASD device, the release volume for 7.2. When you install the work system, it's going to populate a DASD volume called 730 RL1. That DASD volume from the work system has to be maintained, and it is going to be immediately attached to the system on the LPAR that you're upgrading. So now the release volume actually exists in your 7.2 system. It's attached to the system. So the mini disks that have been populated on that DASD device will be available to your first level system. And what's needed then is to add directory entries to your first level directory that map the mini disks on that release volume. So that's adding Mate 730, for example, as a directory entry to your first level system. So you install this work system just to get the DVD content on DASD, and then you're going to run this inst upgrade tool, inst upgrade, and it's going to be two phases basically. So there's a phase one of it, and you're going to do a prime operation. So inst upgrade prime for stage 1. And that's basically going to build a catalog of everything that needs to be done to finish the stage 1 of the upgrade. And stage 1 doesn't really modify your running system at all. It just adds new content to the system. So you could run stage 1 prime and commit without worrying about doing something to your first level system. That's going to add a bunch of virtual machine definitions to your directory, main 730, and then all the definitions for the new versions of the IBM service machines that are part of VM. So 7VM PTK30 instead of 7VM PTK20, and 7VM TCP30 instead of TCP20. All of those get added to the system. Then stage 2, again, you're running this from MiGMate. It will modify your current system, because stage 2 then, and there's a prime which builds a catalog of steps to do, a recipe of steps that have to be done to finish that stage of the upgrade, which is the final stage of the upgrade. So you'd run inst upgrade stage 2 prime, and then inst upgrade stage 2 commit. That modifies your system. And basically what's happening there is analogous to a huge service being done on your system, because the inst upgrade process is going to push out onto your production runtime mini disks of your system. And these would be the mini disks owned by Maint, for example. So the content that's on the 493, for example, owned by Maint 730, the runtime objects there are going to be pushed out to Maint's 193. So all the 7.2 content that was there is deleted under the control of VMSys. So only stuff that's in the SES catalog, and the 7.3 content is copied from the Maint 7.3 493 to the Maint 193, again under the control of VMSys. And that's just taking place for basically every component in the system. So it's a big operation, but you'll see a lot of messages coming across where it looks like, gosh, this is sort of stuff you normally see in service. And then the final part of stage 2 commit is exactly that. It's a huge put to prod, and it's going to rebuild every segment in the spool, because now you don't want old DCSSs and NSSs that are associated with IBM content. You want the 7.3 versions of those, and it's going to rebuild every object, executable object that might need to be rebuilt. So it's a huge put to prod that gets done. And when stage 2 commit is finished, then you're ready to re-IPL the system using the same res pack you've always used, only this time it's going to come up as a 7.3 system instead of 7.2. So the upgrade process is very different from the initial install process that we just went through. So you can see here, we actually finished. Now, one thing, SC ID, I need to do here that you would never come across in a non-SSI install is run this little utility called instskid remove. This removes scaffolding in the system config file that allows multiple of those SSI members to actually be IPL'd in this one virtual machine. It puts it back so that now each member of the SSI cluster has to actually run in its designated location. This can be emphasized by looking at the system config file. So you'll notice that in the system config file, we have now, instead of allowing just VMO2 to run anywhere, that's commented out, both VMO1 and VMO2 can only run in their designated LPAR, which happened to be the virtual machine VM Team 10 and 10A. Notice we have an SSI record set up for us. We have a qualified system config set up for us properly. And if we continue on down here, where is it? We have Activate IS link statements already set up. So there's Able2 Baker 1 and Able2 Baker 2 from VMO1 to VMO2 and Baker 2 Able 1 and so forth for VMO1. Now, how do I make use of those? Well, I got to shut down. Shut down here. So we're shutting down VMO2, which was the last system that we were on, coming back to the first level virtual machine. All right, so we shut down VMO2, I'll IPL CMS. Now this is the install virtual machine, and this SSI second DIRPROF is the key here. If you didn't actually have directory entries to run these VM systems, this file actually supplies them for you. I actually already have those directory entries set up, so I don't need these, but this is very convenient because I now, if the virtual machine I was using here was just to install, and I made sure all the DASD was available to it, but I'm not actually going to run these members in this virtual machine. I have directory entries already set up for me to be able to run the members. But what's more important is here is a profile exec that would go on the 191 of the VM Team 10 virtual machine. And you can see here, it's going to define the CTC, Able2 Baker 1, Baker 2. It's going to do a couple to VM Team 10A for its end of the virtual CTC. And similarly, a profile exec for VM Team 10A. I cut and paste this out, and it's going to do the define virtual CTCs and couple statements to make sure that the CTCs are connected up for the virtual CTC. So if you're going to run second level, you don't have to worry about CTCs. The install process provides everything for you in terms of correct system config entries and profile exec, so you make sure you have the right virtual CTCs. All right, so hopefully that helps in terms of answering the upgrade question, and you actually got to see the conclusion of the second level install. We're still on 5 Baker Charlie on the first level install, so about 2 hours in the future this install will finish.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos like this one. Have a suggestion for another video topic? Feel free to leave a comment below.